Hello and welcome to At the Bench with Silver Dollar Productions. If you followed our other video on taking a Westminster chime movement out of either a Revere or General Electric clock, or if you just received your clock's movement back from our shop for repair, then this particular video is going to step you through on successfully putting the movement back into the case. Now, for today's example, we're going to be using this General Electric clock with a full wood front and the 3 holes. Most of the clocks you're going to find are going to have this particular configuration. Or you may have a clock that has a big open hole in the center and then has this mounting bracket right here. In either case, this particular video will work. Now, before we begin, let's take an inventory of some of the parts and tools that we're going to need. If you have either a 2 or a 3 power bench magnifier, that's going to assist you greatly. We're also going to need either some shrink wrap or we're going to need some wire caps. You'll need a flathead screwdriver, a series of small hobby screwdrivers, and a wire cutter. If you've been working on your own movement, here's a few points to look at before you go ahead and put the movement back in the case. First off is the rotor. The very old rotors had a marking on them called top. And this is important to know because you want the word top to be facing upwards when you go ahead and install the rotor. Secondly, you want to take a look at your spacing here between your gear and your plate. The spacing here should be about 1.5 millimeters. No more, no less. And then lastly, and importantly, believe it or not, is double check the tightness of the set screw on here. If this screw isn't tight, then the rotor is going to be running, but the clock won't be working at all. Now again, I like to do this on my lap to keep the wood from getting scratched on the front, plus it's easier for me to see. The first thing you want to do before inserting your movement is go ahead and lock your arms into place. Then, very gently, wiggle that movement inside there and place it until the front shaft protrudes through the hole. Now, to help assist you in lining up the movement to the holes in the front of the case, what I do is I drop the hammer arms and make sure that they're sitting absolutely straight or parallel to the chime rods in there. Using your left hand, hold the movement in and flip the case over. Now comes the difficult part of locating those little mounting holes on the front of the movement, and as you can see, these particular holes here make it very difficult to see inside the case, and this is where the use of a bench magnifier will come in handy. Now, here's a little trick that I do to help keep that movement from moving around while I'm trying to get the first screw in. I took 3 hobby screwdrivers and inserted them through each of the holes and into the mounting. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take one screwdriver out, and the screw that I already had prepared, I'm going to go ahead and set into the case and slowly turn it, and if I have it correct, it should catch. This is very frustrating sometimes. If those things aren't lined up perfectly, you'll be screwing forever. And I think I got it. Yes, I did. Now, I didn't tighten it 100%. But what I can do now is I could take my left hand out from under there and go ahead and set up my next screw. Again, I'm going to push the movement from the back, make sure it's hitting the wood, and turn. Now here's what happens. After you've successfully got 2 of the screws in, the 3rd hole will automatically line up by itself, and now I can go ahead and tighten those first 2 and then go ahead and insert my last one. Alright, our next step is the placement of the dial here. And we're going to be working with these tiny little screws. These things are about as much fun as a bee's nest. The easiest thing to do to prepare yourself for this is to go ahead and set 2 of the screws on there loosely. Give yourself a slight head start. And then all you need to do is just slide the dial on there. And then go ahead and gently place your other two. And once you have them kind of lined up a little bit, begin to tighten them. Now if you notice, I'm using my fingers here to protect the dial. Your screwdriver does have a tendency to slip out of this screw and you will scratch your dial. So this is a main priority right now, is protect that dial. So go ahead and put your dial on and set all 4 of those little screws. Next step, putting the hands back on. It's kind of hard to put the hands back on the clock if you don't know what time it is. So the best way to find out what time it is by just listening to the chimes. Now, as you can probably hear at this point, my chimes don't sound all that good, but that's all right. We're not interested in that right now. We just want to find out what time it is. Two o'clock. Unplug your clock. Resetting the hands is fairly simple. Your hour hand, just wiggle it on the shaft and push it all the way down. And again, because we're at 2 o'clock, I'm going to face it toward 2. Now, one thing about the hour hand is you can move it independently if you have to. And the one thing that you want to watch for is to make sure that the tip is not scraping against the dial, or eventually you're just going to put a nice scratch in your dial. Okay, then your minute hand, you're going to see, because of the bushing on here, that it only goes on one way, and all you got to do is find out which way that goes on. Wiggle it down, and then go ahead, set your little nut. Now, some of these clocks do have a nut between the hour hand and the minute hand. Most of them do not. If yours does, then go ahead and set that nut on before you put your minute hand on. And just hand tighten it. You don't want to over tighten it. And I'm just going to turn that to make sure that it's not hitting the hour hand. And then last but not least, your second hand pushes right into the shaft. And there you go. Well, our last step is going to be placement of the bezel. But before doing so, I might make a suggestion. If you're going to be testing your clock, you may want to run the clock with the bezel off just to make sure that it's operating properly before you put it back on. Or you could put the bezel on but leave it loose. Leave a little gap down here in the bottom just in case you got to snap it off. You don't want to risk scratching your wood. The first thing I like to do is I like to turn the hands backwards. And there's a couple of reasons why. The first is to make sure that my hour hand is not scraping against the dial and that the minute hand is not hitting the hour hand. And then I like to bring them back to 12 o'clock just to make sure that the hands are properly aligned. Again, if the hour hand is not aligned to the minute hand, you can go ahead and move the hour hand independently. So when you're going to go put the bezel back on, and again, this is the friction set with the 2 prongs on it. Just go ahead and insert them into the holes. And you're going to want to use a back and forth motion on this. This will keep from putting excessive pressure on the glass and taking the risk of cracking it. So just set it into the holes and push. And as you're pushing, what you want to watch for is any movement in the second hand, because if you see the second hand move as you're placing your bezel, that's going to tell you that it's scraping the glass. And you're going to want to make a small correction there, and mine is hitting, so I'm going to take this off again. Just push down slightly on the tip here of that second hand. And go ahead and set it again. Again, if it scrapes against the glass, it's going to eventually put a nice scratch into the glass. Nice and gently, just push it down, and there we go. Now, of course, as you heard before, the sound quality from this particular clock leaves a lot to be desired. I do have another video out on correcting the chimes or the sound quality on your Revere or General Electric, and if your sound quality isn't what it should be, that should be the next video to watch. Thanks for stopping.